Welcome to Inside Winnipeg Politics. I'm Kevin Klein, along with two of my colleagues, Winnipeg Sun columnist Geoff Currier and Winnipeg Sun columnist Royce Koop, who is also a professor of political science at the University of Manitoba. We are finally in a race. We know now that the Liberal Party of Canada will pick the next leader of the opposition, which will be their leader on March 9th. That's the date we find out about that. But almost immediately afterwards, our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, takes to the airwaves at CNN in the United States and starts making comments that could hurt the country. Royce, you first brought this up when we were talking before the show. Tell me about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that Trudeau is still the prime minister. He resigned, but not really. He said, I'll leave, but I'm going to stay around until the next leader is selected. Really, he should have resigned, and there should be an interim prime minister right now, because what we've seen now is the current prime minister is going to overshadow this liberal leadership race. He's already done so by going down to the US, appearing on MSNBC and appearing on NBC, and not or
Yeah.
CNN, sorry, and not doing a good job, not representing our country well. So he was speaking with Jake Tapper about Canadian identity and pushing back against Donald Trump's statements about Canada becoming the 51st state. When he was asked about what Canadian identity consists of, the most important thing he said is that we're not Americans. The big thing about Canada is we're not Americans. Really, the most juvenile view of Canadian identity, Canadian culture, all the the richness of this country from sea to shining sea, and that's the way that the prime minister of this country summarizes Canadian identity. It was frankly embarrassing. It was an embarrassing moment for this country, and I think it just drives home the point. He should have resigned, not conditionally resigned. 3 or 4 months from now.
Yeah, Royce, a good point. I guess the oldest person on this panel, but I recall when, as a young guy, and people would ask, what are we as Canadians? And we were kind of struggling, even as we approached our centennial year in 1967, defining ourselves. And very often Canadians would say, well, we're not Americans. We're not the military industrial complex. We're not Las Vegas. We're not, we tended to define ourselves in terms of what we aren't. But I think over the last 50 years or so, that Canadians have begun to get a sense of who we are, what we are, and not just to say we're not Americans, but to understand those things that distinguish us from our American brothers and sisters. Then you have a guy like Justin Trudeau who comes along, says, well, Canada doesn't really have a core identity. And we touched on this, I think, last week in one of our conversations, that if a country doesn't have a core identity, well, okay, we're still a country, but we may no longer be a nation.
Yeah, and it's a great point. And Andrew Coyne, I think, made this point. Say, well, the only thing that is characteristic of Canada is that we're not Americans. Well, then, if we get annexed by the U.S., then that kind of now you are Americans. We need something that distinguishes us, that gives us an identity apart from the Americans. And of course,
well, okay, let's ask this then to both of you guys. If supposing, just theoretically, supposing Canada was absorbed by the United States, would we fit in? Or would we be distinct?
Well, the Democrats would probably have a better chance of winning. Right? If Canadians did become part of the U.S. And I mean, I've heard this argument. I've heard it from some of the other media people saying we got to stand up to the U.S. We got to stand up to what Donald Trump is doing. He's playing a game. I mean, let's admit we're smarter than that, right? We know he's just playing a game, make a little noise over here while he does something over here. He's done that. He did that before when he was president. He's done that in his life. So let him do that. That's his way of negotiating. But the reality is we don't need leaders in any form, shape, or form going down to the United States or making comments negatively about the United States, because the 25% tariff is a real concern. It's a very real concern that we have to take seriously. So you have Premier Ford doing his part, trying to be a leader and show how to deal with the United States. Premier Daniel Smith is doing an excellent job appearing on all kinds of U.S. media. But even right here, Right here in Manitoba, we have people like Nahani Fontaine putting out a video standing with American sisters because of what's going to happen in the United States. What is that? And then you want to send your premier down there, and he wants to start telling people he's going to have these great relationships with the United States. Look, Donald Trump won and won big. It doesn't matter what you think. He won big. So now is not the time to be saying, "Oh, we're going to push back against this. We're going to draw a line and start fighting back." Now is the time for diplomacy and intelligence, not firing back like Trudeau did, saying, "Well, at least we're not Americans." And you're right, Jeff. I mean, people, Vegas is different and the military stance is different. But let me say this: I know more Canadians that go to Vegas and Texas and Florida than go anywhere else. We tend to head down there. We tend to like being down to that part. Look at the amount of people that shop in the United States right here from Winnipeg. And really we are, neighbors, we're close, we're friends, and we depend. We rely on that American
All
security.
true. But would you want to be a citizen of a country that is that divided?
I don't think we ever will be. I don't think that.
No, but I mean, would you want to be?
No, and I don't think that's the plan. I think
No, and I mean, hey, let's face it. I think of Donald Trump as a cross between P.T. Barnum and Charles Foster Kane. For those of you who remember the movie Citizen Kane with Orson Welles, one of the great, maybe the greatest film ever made. And he was a sort of a blustery type character based on William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper man.
yeah.
And he just wanted everybody to love him. And then P.T. Barnum, of course, is one of the greatest hucksters ever. And that's kind of what Donald Trump is. He's a dime store huckster. Every enterprise he's ever had has failed.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he's been able to swindle people and convince them, and you gotta love me. You have to love me. And so if you take the long view of this, in another 3.5 years, he's going to be a lame duck president. And, we're going to carry on. So our heads should not explode because Donald Trump says something. I think we should have learned something his first 4 years in power, that he says a whole lot of things that are never going to happen. So let's sort of, like you say, Kevin, let's exhale. Let's use diplomacy. Let's send our smartest people down to deal with the people who we're going to have to deal with on that level, which is, the governors of the individual states, people in Congress. Let's deal with those folks, and let's be grown-ups about this.
Yeah, I think, Kevin, you're right. It's like being annexed by the U.S. is not a serious threat. 25% tariff is a serious threat, and it's something we should be concerned about. And, the Prime Minister, even Doug Ford to some extent, to kind of push back, well, maybe we should take California and Alaska. There's not a snowball's chance in hell. But what is the point of this kind of rhetoric when you're talking about someone like Daniel Trump or Donald Trump? The person that I think has been very impressive is Danielle Smith. She's appeared on lots of American TV shows. She's met with governors, and you can find those interviews on YouTube. She strikes the perfect conciliatory note, emphasizing positive relationships, how tariffs wouldn't be good for either country. It wouldn't be good for American consumers. And I think she's done a fantastic job. Talk about rising to the occasion. Some of the premiers are definitely doing that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us could learn how Daniel Smith is handling this, like the Prime Minister and other premiers. You're absolutely right. We could learn from that. I think Wab Kinew has to talk to his caucus and stop the nonsense on, TikTok and Twitter and all of these attacks and such. I mean, they're not called for, as Jeff said. Take a deep breath. Let's just continue forward on how we are. But again, Donald Trump, and you kind of described him very well, Jeff. I mean, I see him as a wrestler, right? I'm the greatest. I'm this. I'm that. He's Hulk Hogan. And he's played that character for life. If you've ever, I don't know if you've watched the movie, the unrecognized biopic of him, but he was taught that by a guy, right? Just tell him it's the greatest deal in the world. Tell him you're the greatest, even if it's not true. Eventually, people will believe you. And he's really over the top with it. But I'm going to tell you something. You watch politicians right now, I think they're all like him. They're just not as loud and obnoxious. They all think they're great. They all think they have the right idea. They all believe they're the ones that are going to make things happen. He just plays it up differently. So I would prefer that we sit back and go, that's fine. Let's sit down. Let's have meetings with the people. You're right, meet with the governors. Let's develop that relationship. Let's work that relationship because that's how we're going to make this successful. I mean, you have Elon Musk playing in it now, making fun of Canada or, pointing things out in Canada. All good. He lived here. He can do that, right? He can say whatever he wants. But again, they know the value of Canada. They know what we have. And I want to go back to what we had talked about before. Geoff, you did this, I think last week we talked about it. We are the ones in the driver's seat. We have more natural resources and we have the natural resources they want, even the water that we have. That's something that's important to the US. So I really believe if I'm negotiating, and I love negotiating a good deal, that we're the ones that are going to make the rules. And we can't let him control the narrative. As my mom used to tell me, as long as you give somebody a stage, they will keep acting out. So take the stage away from them and start saying, well, here, we have the resources, so let's have a conversation.